Jojo!
Ay, 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 ay.
It has been a long time coming, my friends, and though we've done this in a slipshod order, yeah, I know. It's a crime we're finally talking about the Part 2 JoJo villains, the Pillarmen, in the last animated villains series of videos. But look, when the Kira video is almost at 500,000 views at the time we recording this, you look me in the eye and you tell me I was wrong to start there. But regardless, it's time to talk about the second group of villains in the JoJo verse, the Pillarmen.
Next words from your mouth are, I'm going to knock that smirk right off of your face. Watch.
I'm going to knock that smirk right off your face! Wait a second, you can't do that! That's my trick!
Frankly speaking, it's not that I don't find the Pillarmen to be interesting villains. In fact, one could even say they're a lot more interesting as the villains than Dio was, because they're more active in the plot of JoJo Part 2. I just personally found it a lot more interesting to talk about the other major JoJo villains first, and while that may sound like a whole condemnation of the characters, I assure you, it isn't. The Pillarmen, at the very least, are fun villains, especially when you consider all three of them as separate characters, each with their own personalities and eccentricities. But enough of me talking. I'm MangaKamen, and it's time to tackle the Pillarmen. After tens of thousands of years before the events of Battle Tendency, there was a race of super beings, highly intelligent, immensely strong, and the ability to manipulate their bodies in extreme ways, such as using their veins to spurt blood or contort their bodies in various forms. They were the pinnacle of world and evolution, with only one weakness: the sun. But there was one member of the Pillarmen who once sought to break the weakness and become the greatest living creature of all time. That man was Kars, the one who decided to develop a means to instill evolution in himself. His method of doing so was to create a stone mask that when blood was exposed onto it, tendrils of stone would erupt and pierce the wearer's brain. On humans, this would turn them into vampires. Honestly, that's a unique way of making it to be a vampire. Acupuncture! It actually makes sense when you think about it. But when the Pillarmen wears it, it awakens their abilities and makes them nigh invincible. But with an augmented mask with the red stone of Asia, it could eliminate the one weakness that all Pillarmen had: the sun. Though the prospect of this elated Kars, most of the rest of his race did not approve of this, and they sought to destroy him, since that ambition would create a natural order cataclysm. Kars and his co-conspirator ECDC managed to wipe out all but themselves and two infants of their race, and went out into the world seeking the elusive red stone of Asia to make their dreams come true. For thousands of years, the four traveled the world in search of the stone, but when their efforts became fruitless, they were forced to hibernate, waiting for a time for when the stone could be in their grasp. As villains, it's certainly a bit of a step up from the first incarnation of JoJo's villain. Now, while Dio is a villain that I myself have sung the praises of for his evilness in various videos, there's something to say about the greater scope of things. What I mean to say is that if you really were to think about it, without the Pillarmen, there wouldn't actually be a story to the world of JoJo, because without the creation of the stone masks, Dio wouldn't have become a vampire, and therefore wouldn't have the entire series set in motion. And it's not like the Pillarmen thought ahead to do this. This is mostly just a byproduct of their experimentations with the masks on humans. It has this odd feeling to it when you really think about it. Like how you're told that humans are harming the earth through our own means of progress with technology, and that the byproducts of that have an after effect on our world. It makes it appropriate for Araki to have designed them as they were in that regard, because it gives them an air of higher beings, almost like gods of sorts. As he himself said, that's why I based the four of their appearances, including Saviento, on Roman statues, Egyptian sphinxes, and the Japanese Neo statues, to give them a strange physical beauty as godlike figures in organic form. And it makes sense. The Pillarmen are global threats, not only for their insane abilities, but for the fact that they have the ability to eat people simply by touching them, and don't even have to be aware of doing it. Hell, as demonstrated through the pages of the manga and the anime itself, the moment that Kars does gain the ability to break his limitation, not only is he able to evolve insanely quick to any situation, but he can't even be taken down by the sun or even the series' power system at the time. Come on, or Ripple, depending on which one floats your boat. It's interesting to think about, stacking the odds so heavily against your protagonist who, let's face it, is just a snot-nosed, cocky British American teenager with a knack of being super out there.
You're it!
Really puts things into perspective when you think about it. Though it's not unheard of in stories that you have a plucky youth fighting against the ancient evil that is super powerful and could crush him in an instant if they wanted to, and he has to rely on his wits to get out of the situations. And it doesn't hurt that the three are at the very least compelling villains with their own personalities and quirks. But at the same time, each of them are an established threat in their own regard as well, and it makes each of them stand out from each other. Though before we get to their personalities, we should discuss their goals a little bit more, for the fact that their desire to become the ultimate life forms.
I am the ultimate life form.
And who doesn't want to strive to be that? Especially when there's only one thing stopping you, and that's the sun. It's honestly a simple goal, but one with massive repercussions that could have on the entirety of the human race, since we just become a 24-hour, all-you-can-eat buffet for the Pillarmen. But let's actually talk about them as characters, shall we?
Choose your character.
Before we continue, I think it's appropriate to say that I'm not going to be talking about Satana or Saviento in depth in this video. It's not because I think he's a bad villain, but it's because even Cars himself likens the guy as a guard dog. And since we've got about 3 other characters to discuss for this, I'd rather not kill myself by adding a 4th to the discussion.
This is fucking tragic. Look at yourself.
Each of the Pillarmen have their own personalities and views on things such as honor, and it makes it at the very least compelling to see them interact with the exuberant Joseph Joestar, who is also probably one of the more expressive and out there Jojo protagonists.
Run for your life! Oh, man, I knew you were gonna do that!
Note to self, do video on Joseph Joestar. Tell audience if they want me to do that. Give this video 5k likes. Sorry about that. Let's consider each of the Pillarmen individually, starting with Wamu. Out of the 3 Pillarmen, Wamu was obviously the most honorable member of the trio. A true warrior who respects the acts of bravery, even from lowly humans. Probably one of the best examples would have to be...
これはまさかこれはシーザーのバンダナそしてピアスワムーのピアスだ
After his fight with Caesar, Wamu could have easily popped the bubble of blood by the secondary protagonist Caesar. Inside was Caesar's iconic headband along with an antidote that Joseph needed. In all honesty, had he popped the bubble and taken care of it at the time, Wamu wouldn't have lost his duel against Joseph later on.
You see the bandana? All the pieces flying around?
Every little fragment is still on fire, and they're entering my body.
Wamu, you have been a worthy and admirable fighter. But a powerful ally named Caesar was with me throughout this contest.
Wamu as a character, and even more so as a villain, is an interesting case, especially for the Jojo verse. Typically when you look at Jojo villains, most of the time they don't join up with the main protagonists on their journey. Araki will make them out to be the scummiest scumbags, and will often get what's coming to them. But Wamu doesn't really fit that mold, so he stands out. He's a noble warrior who saw combat as an honorable sport, and when his ego gets in the way, he accepts punishment from his opponents, as shown when fighting against Joseph in the first time they met.
Almost sounded like you said go ahead and retrieve your weapon, which would be ridiculous. I mean, why would you retrieve something that comes right back to you?
If anything, the concept of honor is a hindrance to not only Wamu, but his 2 masters, Cars and AC/DC, as he had the ability and chance to ultimately kill Joseph Joestar really early.
Yielding in the moments before your death. Is it because you have bricks for brains, or do you still have another trick for me?
Do you really want to know?
Actually, no. Let me guess. Because you're so obviously clever, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you wouldn't be stupid enough to be holding a stick of dynamite behind your back.
Damn, he's on to me!
And I know you wouldn't insult my intelligence by thinking you could quickly throw the brake and send the minecart flying off the tracks. Maybe like this!
But Wamu's honor got in the way of eliminating the annoying pest that was Joseph. Again, most villains in Jojo don't really have that scrap of honor to them. A lot of them tend to be pretty big monsters with varying degrees of psychopathy or messed up natures to them. And while that's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, since a lot of the Jojo villains, especially the weekly fodder, tend to be as deep as a puddle when it comes to death, Wamu stands out since while he is on the evil side, wanting to aid cars in AC/DC, he does have a sense of honor. And instead of killing Joseph Joestar, Wamu instead does something different. To ensure that Joseph can back up his words of a challenge, Wamu proposes to Joseph.
Say hello to the wedding ring of death. Guess where it goes? A hint, not on your finger.
What are you doing with that?
This ring will start to dissolve in 33 days. It's impossible to remove, and once dissolved, it will release a virulent poison. Any attempt to remove or damage it will also release the lethal poison.
It's always the ball and chain that gets the good ones. In order to remove the poisonous ring, Jojo needs to defeat and acquire the lip ring from Wamu to survive or he'll die. Again, this is due to Wamu's honor that he holds. And while Jojo could have taken the antidote he received from Caesar, there was also something stopping him. It's the same reason why Joseph does this.
What is going on?
Roy Caesar's bubble of blood that carried his bandana and ring, knowing full well that they posed a serious threat to you. Was that pity?
It was because the man was a worthy and noble warrior. He deserved to be honored for that.
What you'll say next is, Jojo, you can't mean.
Jojo, you can't mean...
The honor you showed my friend, Caesar's warrior spirit, had earned your respect. So in return, I wanted to find a way to honor your warrior spirit. My blood is a tribute to you.
Even though we see the power that Wamu is capable of, he still had some redeeming qualities, his honor and the respect he showed to worthy adversaries. And that alone is something that makes Wamu stand out from not only the Pillarmen, but the Jojo villain roster too. That isn't to say the other Pillarmen don't have their own unique bells and whistles. AC/DC doesn't hold the same code of honor that Wamu does, but he does hold respect for Wamu's decision to allow Jojo to live, which does indicate that he holds some level of regard to his fellow Pillarmen's decisions, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have his own tricks.
I hope you didn't think your paltry tricks would help you escape, human. I don't imagine the two of us will fight, but just in case, here's a gift for you. One that fits perfectly around your windpipe!
Which, considering at the point in time with the power system in Jojo, which was Ripple or Hamon, it's a devastating handicap to Jojo, mainly because to use the power of Hamon, you need to have a mastery of your breathing, and with that ring limiting Jojo's breathing power, it would hold him back. AC/DC isn't as honorable as Wamu is, since this guy does love pulling underhanded tricks, most notably...
Slept right for weeks! Huh? I just can't take it! I just can't take it! What the hell is this?
Ah yes, nothing like psyching out your opponent then using your own veins of boiling blood to set up a trap while your opponent is confused about everything. Out of the three Pillarmen, AC/DC is shown to be the craftiest and possibly even the most intelligent of them, especially since he's able to get ahead of Jojo in planning strategy, even showcasing that he's even able to read Jojo's mind and thoughts. Well, not actual mind reading, but...
Smiling again, I don't like it! What are you laughing about this time?
The next words from your mouth are, I'm going to knock that smirk right off of your face. Watch.
I'm going to knock that smirk right off your face! Wait a second, you can't do that! That's my trick!
It should be noted that AC/DC does hold some respect for Jojo. There are multiple times that he remarks that Jojo did improve greatly in the span of less of a month, meaning he's willing to acknowledge positive traits of his opponents, while AC/DC is the first one to fall of the three that shouldn't discount his personality. And finally we have Cars, and to be honest, he's a bit harder to pin down, since we don't get a lot about what Cars actually is, especially since he tends to be a bit of a contradictory character. What I mean by that is there seems to be a hint of love for the natural world, where there are two notable events. The first is when he kills a couple of drunks who are driving recklessly that would kill a dog and even wounding himself to protect a bunch of flowers. But then...
Gets his hands on the red stone. First thing he does is make a squirrel.
yeah, that just gets thrown out the window. And that's not the only thing to really say that's contradictory about the character. While at first it seems that he is as honorable as his fellow Pillarmen, even at one point proclaiming that he'll avenge their deaths, another Pillarman, Santana, was just considered a guard dog, despite the fact that he was raised by Cars and AC/DC like Wamu was. Cars tends to flip-flop when it suits him and his ideals, and it doesn't help that he's pretty much a poster boy for the mysterious and vague villain trope that would be used by other Jojo villains. It's why, despite Cars being the leader of the Pillarmen and obviously the final boss of Part 2, he's a bit harder to pin down as a character, especially since he's willing to go back on his word, being sadistic and playing dirty. Such as getting his hands on the Red Stone of Asia, where he had accepted a duel against the mentor character of the show, Lisa, and before their match could even begin, he struck her down so he'd get his hands on the stone that would induce his evolution. But that does mean that each Pillarman feels unique in having their own character, and while Cars is a bit more confusing to pin down, you can always say one thing about these villains: they're a bunch of hams.
Down, 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 down.
Which, if you know anything about me, I love it when the villains can be entertaining while at the same time showing off how demented they can be. Of course, when we talk about villains, we need to talk about them as a threat. I've always stated that a villain needs to be a threat to the main characters, and it should be obvious since they're supposed to care for the fact that if these three were allowed to roam unchecked, well... we'd be on the menu. Yummy. And again, they can do this with a simple touch, and they don't even have to be conscious about doing it.
Mark! Get out of there now! No!
That alone was quite gruesome, and this isn't just humans that can face this terrible fate, but vampires as well, as demonstrated with Santana devouring one quite easily. The Pillarmen each have unique abilities though, all awakened by the stoned mass that allows them to completely control their bodies, and at the very least allows each of them to stand out from each other. Wamu possesses an ability called Wind Mode, which allows him to manipulate the wind around him and blow from his body. Not in that way. This is highlighted in two of the more standout techniques, his Divine Sandstorm and the Windsuit. Divine Sandstorm is produced by having his forearms spin rapidly, creating a pair of massive windstorms that can rip people asunder. And his Windsuit is a more tactical technique, where he uses the steam from his body to release air from the lungs, which covers him in, well, a suit of wind, which not only gives him the ability to essentially become invisible, but also reflect the suns off his body so he can be outside in the day, although it can only last for 10 seconds since it takes a lot of energy to maintain. He does have one more technique, and it's a bit of a last resort. The Atmospheric Rift, where he unleashes a powerful compressed burst of air from his horn, but has a lot of drawbacks as it can tear his body apart from the heat and scrape from the wind compression. AC/DC, meanwhile, has manipulation as well for his body, but has a far more dangerous technique in my opinion, and that's his Flame Mode, which he can heat up his body's blood to 500 degrees Celsius, and by hurling it out of his body, it can melt anything it touches. Not to mention, because of his awakened control, he can control his blood vessels to shoot out the blood from various degrees, angles, and even locations. It sounds simple, but considering his fight with Jojo on the spikes, he's able to have them weave around terrain and spurt blood wherever he wants. And to top it off, he actually met a Chinese military general, Sun Tzu, and learned about the art of war. Quite literally, since he is the author of the famous Art of War, which was devoted to military strategy and tactics that have been used since the early 5th century BC. So what I'm saying is, AC/DC has got that big brain going on and he knows how to use it. And finally, we have Cars, and whoo boy, does he have a lot. Well, let's start with his standard ability, which allows him to create bladed appendages on his arms and legs that are covered in tiny shark-like teeth claws that move about like a chainsaw, which allows him to cut pretty much anything like moving cars and even slice up bullets. But that is nothing in comparison for when he actually acquires his goal of becoming the ultimate life form.
I am the ultimate life form. I go wherever I want.
No, he doesn't get chaos control, though there was one point where Cars did gain the ability to teleport. Not sure how he did that though, but regardless, when he becomes the ultimate life form, Cars gains the DNA of every organism to ever live on Earth. What this means is that he can manipulate his body to the cellular level to gain traits of any life form, like turning his hand into a squirrel, or grow wings, or turn the feathers from those wings into metal-eating piranhas, or even have the ability to use Hamon, even at a skilled level greater than anyone else in the series. Cars becomes a literal god on Earth, someone who is able to survive even a volcano's heat. One could even argue that Joseph didn't need to defeat Cars, it was all because of a series of stupid events that set Cars to his demise. Not that he would know that.
I just got lucky, but thinking I outsmarted him will drive Cars nuts.
It took an even greater god to take out Cars, and that god is named Araki. I joke, but I do find a bit of a great irony that it took an action that not even Jojo planned that would lead to the Earth outright rejecting the greatest life form it produced, making the Pillarmen become nothing more than a piece of useless space junk that wished for death until his mind eroded into nothing. But back to the main point of this section, the Pillarmen are obviously a dangerous threat. Combined with their personalities, they at the very least provide a challenge for Jojo that he needed to overcome.
What's a guy gotta do to get a little food in here? Cars!
One thing I love to do when I talk about villains in this series is compare them to the main character and how well they act as foils for the respective protagonists. And to some degree, I think all three members of the Pillarmen do act as foils for Joseph Joestar. And while I do want to dedicate an actual video to Joseph, I do think we need to describe him in order to actually deep dive into how I think each of them provide as different foils for the main character.
Wait, what's this about? You're all staring as though you've seen a ghost. I know it's a funeral and huh? What the? What's my name doing on there? I'm alive and well!
Joseph Joestar in his prime is honestly one of the goofier protagonists of the Jojo series. What with him willing to do some over-the-top stunts to fulfill his goals, cross-dressing, using a Tommy gun to fight a vampire, and running away from said vampire. He's also not above using crafty tricks to outsmart his opponents, since he does have a love for the art of misdirection.
Let's play. Sure, but I was still able to pull one over on you, wasn't I? And you should take a look at the grenade you just knocked away.
You son of a...
Now, obviously we look towards the Pillarmen, they do have contrasting correlation with Joseph. Once again, we're starting with Wamu. Wamu, as we discussed, is a warrior of honor, and he tends to be very straightforward with his attacks. Hell, it's because of that he's able to see right through some of Joseph's tricks.
Actually, no. Let me guess. Because you're so obviously clever, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you wouldn't be stupid enough to be holding a stick of dynamite behind your back.
Damn, he's on to me!
And I know you wouldn't insult my intelligence by thinking you could quickly throw the brake and send the minecart flying off the tracks. Maybe like this!
Granted, that straightforwardness and warrior's pride is what allows Joseph to actually read the character of Wamu and convince the warrior to spare him so he could train further. And when the two actually do fight, Jojo does gain some level of respect for Wamu, who, as I also brought up before, could have easily popped the blood bubble left by Caesar. And while Jojo does have respect for Caesar because of the action he took to get the antidote, I like to think that Joseph did gain respect for Wamu's warrior spirit during their fight, allowing Joseph to evolve and learn from him. Then we have AC/DC. I think it's pretty obvious as to why you can compare the two as foils.
Plans, aren't you? Oof, you went pale, Jojo. Did I hit the mark? Was I anywhere close to the bullseye?
Both of the characters are a bit more of tricksters and are actively trying to one-up each other and battle with their strategies, even going so far as to use misdirection to win. Joseph and AC/DC even use similar techniques to gain the upper hand in combat, and while both of them use misdirection as a weapon, playing deeper and deeper, I would argue that neither one of them are what you would call dishonest.
Lovely birthday cake covered in candles flickering with their merry little red flames.
He's on a knife's edge! He's not going to make it!
Caesar! Judging from what I can see, we have to assume that Logs has been killed. If Jojo is not the one to survive, we will be the ones AC/DC will come after next. Jojo is too far away for us to be able to help him now. I know it's painful, but right now we have to think about protecting...
Because there is a difference between deception and lying. Deception is making someone believe something is false, and lying is specifically telling someone something else. It's a small difference, but one I think is more important to establish, especially when we look towards Cars, who represents the lying aspect. Because while Cars puts on a brave front, much like how Jojo does, such as saying he respects a warrior's pride, when it comes to his goals of evolution, he's quick to throw it out, as showcased when he attacks Lisa to get the Red Stone of Asia. And while Jojo is a fan of deceptive tactics, politics, Cars is certainly not above that as well, even using hostages to get what he wants, even throwing aside the pride of the Pillarmen too. To me, the Pillarmen act as foils for Jojo since they also represent a part of Joseph's personality, and in some cases take it to an extreme. Now, I could be reading way too much into that, but hey, I'm just giving my opinion on the matter, and it's fun to do this sort of thing, you know? It's really telling about the series of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure when you consider the scale of things. Like, the Pillarmen really are bigger than the world itself. When you consider the first villain in JoJo, Dio Brando, a poor kid who would turn into a vampire who would return in part 3, Araki really raised the stakes with these 3 villains. But it always raises an interesting question. How do you top a character like Cars? I mean, in the idea of him being a threat, you've got a being who can basically adapt to any situation on Earth. Keywords there being on Earth, mind you. When you boil it down, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure really has to live up to its name of being bizarre, because when the Pillarmen were toppled over, the villains afterwards not only had to be given completely different power system to work, but they also had to top the bizarre concepts that the Pillarmen were. With the Pillarmen, you had these ancient godlike beings with strange body powers, with one of them essentially becoming a god, and yet the escalation of villains kept going. Following this, we would be bringing back the first villain, only this time he has the ability to stop time, then a serial killer who had the hand fetish developed when he saw the Mona Lisa, who also has the ability to turn anything into a bomb and could rewind time, a mafioso with multiple personalities and a paranoid behavior who can erase chunks of time at will, a priest who not only has a thing for prime numbers but was so enthralled with the bisexual vampire of the first and third chapters that he was willing to get to heaven, which meant resetting the universe by pressing the fast forward button on the world. And what came after all that? Why, the President of the United States, who's a dimension hopper, somehow lost a ton of weight in a single manga panel and is trying to collect the pieces of Jesus Christ's corpse. And after saying all that, I feel like I took some sort of illegal drug and I'm high on something. I'm sure my neighbors who heard that are going, "Oh boy, the Java freak next door is acting like a weirdo again. Probably thinks the President of the United States is a dimension hopper again." And all of that just makes me smile, because that's the kind of series this is, you know? Because when you really think about it, the Pillarmen are honestly kind of mundane in comparison to the other JoJo villains. They have a lot more of a typical villain shonen traits that people go, "Oh yeah, that's anime, alright." Because of all the weirdness of their abilities and the JoJo brand of wackiness, they really do represent what it means to be a JoJo villain, because they set the groundwork for what would come after. Let's see, Battle Hensi was penned in 1987 to 1989, that's about 38 years, like hot damn. 38 years. But yeah, I think the Pillarmen are great villains, and if you enjoyed this video and wish for me to talk about Joseph Joestar, please put down in the comments, "Next you'll say!" And if we reach 5k likes in this video, I'll gladly do it. But until next time, my friends, I'm MangaKamen, thanks for watching, and arrivederci!